Hi everyone, it's my pleasure to participate in this Anguilla FinTech and Compliance conference. Actually, it's exciting for me because even though I've been participating in dozens of international conferences these last few years, it's actually my first time speaking in the Caribbean. So that's what makes this experience much more amazing for me. So thank you very much to the organizers and to GIFT as well for inviting me to this event. My name is Dr. Oriol Caudevilla, and I'm going to proceed by explaining a bit about central bank digital currencies, also known as CBDCs for short. The title of my talk is CBDCs, Global Trends. I'm going to try to bring you an approach to what CBDCs are, to what they are not, and also to the main projects that we can see worldwide in order to analyze them very briefly and compare them. I'm going to do that in less than 45 minutes. After this event, please, all of you, feel free to reach out to me if you have any remaining doubts about anything I said or didn't say. So, without further ado, I'm going to proceed by sharing my screen. I prepared the presentation that I wanted to share. One second, please. To try to bring some light to certain confusions that people make, especially on the media. So now you can see my presentation. Sorry for this technical delay. Basically, as I said before, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, for example, in case you want to follow my updates or discuss any of these topics in more detail afterwards. Just a quick disclaimer, basically everything I'm going to say here today on my presentation or orally is actually my thoughts. So I'm not speaking here on behalf of anyone. So everything I say is just my opinion, my thought. So about myself, well, I don't think we need to dwell on myself for longer. Basically, I just wanted to mention that I'm currently wearing several hats. I'm working as a fintech advisor and also a researcher. And well, I'm co-leader of the financial inclusion and CBDC working groups at the Global Impact FinTech Forum, GIFT. Aside from that, I'm advising a few fintech companies from all over the world, and I'm fellow as well at several universities and organizations such as Digital Euro Association, the Asian Institute of International Financial Law at the University of Hong Kong, the Singapore University of Social Sciences, etc., etc. So, without further ado, I'm going to proceed by going to the core part of my topic, which is an introduction to CBDCs. What are central bank digital currencies? It is very important to talk about that, basically because, as I said before, it is quite common to see mistakes being made, not just by people, but also by the media, by some journalists. It's kind of common, so that's why I think it is important to bring some light to this issue. As you can see, central bank digital currencies has several components. I mean, central bank, digital, and currency. So we need to go to the very beginning, and I know that's very basic, but still, what's central bank money? As you know, central bank money, those dollars, euros, yuans that you may be using nowadays, are money issued by a central bank. They are legal tender, and therefore they represent a claim against that central bank. So far, so good. I mean, it's a very basic concept that all of you already know. So, taking this one step further, we get to this new idea of CBDCs. CBDCs are nothing else but a digital form of that central bank money that we already use. In other words, whenever we talk about digital euro or potential digital US dollar or digital yuan, we are talking just about a digital form of that central bank money that we already have. So far, it seems quite easy, but there's more to it. The fact of being digital also implies, or should I say involves, that these CBDCs are going to be programmable. So far, whenever a central bank issued a coin, a note, they printed or minted those, they couldn't add or remove certain features from that because we were just talking about a piece of paper or a piece of metal. Whereas right now, with CBDCs, central banks are going to be able to add or remove many more features from this central bank money, because it's going to be programmable due to its digital nature. So as you can see, it's kind of groundbreaking. It's a new idea that it's going to allow central banks to be much more flexible when it comes to what objectives they want to achieve and how. So as I said before, any CBDC, in order for it to be a CBDC, needs to be digital and needs to be issued by a central bank. Therefore, it needs to be a liability of the central bank. So far, so good. However, we can also wonder, why would any central bank be interested in issuing a CBDC? I mean, why do they need to make things maybe more complicated than before? Well, the thing is, there are like several possible motivations behind CBDCs. Central banks may decide to issue a CBDC to replace physical banknotes for monetary policy purposes, for example, to reduce the lower bound on interest rates. They may be doing so to fight financial crime much more efficiently, for global geopolitical purposes, as a tool to improve financial stability, to promote financial inclusion, for technology and innovation purposes. As you can see, this is actually not a closed list. The list could be much longer. There may be many reasons, many motivations behind central banks deciding to issue a CBDC. The thing is, and that's what makes CBDC so interesting and yet so complicated perhaps at the same time, each central bank is going to decide on which purposes, on which motivations they want to focus. In other words, the future digital yuan, for example, which is going to be launched soon, will not need to look at all like the future digital euro or the future digital Canadian dollar or the future digital US dollar. And this is so because the People's Bank of China, for example, when designing and deploying digital yuan, may not have had in mind the same objectives as, let's say, the European Central Bank. And that's very important because we know that certain countries, for example, may find it more beneficial to focus on, for example, promoting financial inclusion. If we talk about sub-Saharan Africa, the Indian subcontinent, areas in the world where the amount of unbanked people is very high, it is in those areas where it might perhaps be more interesting for central banks to focus on promoting financial inclusion through its CBDC. Whereas in, let's say, Europe, Canada, China, perhaps their objectives may be different. For example, in the case of China, as I'm going to say later, one of the main objectives or purposes behind China deciding to launch its digital yuan is precisely the idea of trying to make the yuan become a more important currency in international trade. So the idea of internationalizing the yuan is there, which perhaps might not be the same idea that some countries in sub-Saharan Africa might have when deciding to study a CBDC. So as you can see, it's a very flexible field, which is going to depend very much on each central bank's interests and purposes. Taking this one step further, there is one key distinction that I need to make. And I know this is an area that has caused a fair amount of confusion, as I said, not just between between most people, but even among certain media. And that is the fact that CBDCs are not cryptocurrencies. That's very important. It is kind of common to see some articles referring to CBDCs as state-run cryptocurrencies or something like that. But the thing is, CBDCs are not cryptos for several reasons. I mean, one of them is the fact that CBDCs are centralized, whereas cryptocurrencies are decentralized. I mean, as I said before, a CBDC is issued by a central bank. It's legal tender. Therefore, it is as centralized as anything can be. Whereas cryptocurrencies are the opposite. They are the flagship of this movement known as DeFi, decentralized finance, which means that the rationale behind the CBDC and a cryptocurrency is actually the opposite. One is as controlled as it can be, whereas the other is precisely part of this decentralized finance movement. Therefore, it kind of tries to avoid to be controlled. So as you can see, it's a different rationale. On top of that, the use that we can make of both of them is also different. Because CBDCs are going to be, regardless of the rationale behind its central bank when issuing them, a CBDC is going to be like a digital version of the cash, of the money, of the fiat currencies that we already have. So in other words, we are quite likely going to use CBDCs to make the same things that we're doing nowadays. We are going to get our salaries paid in our accounts, perhaps through CBDCs. We are going to make payments using CBDCs, etc. Whilst when it comes to cryptocurrencies, it is true that cryptos can and are used in certain scenarios as a means of payment. That is true. But we cannot deny that cryptocurrencies are actually not currencies per se. I know they are called cryptocurrencies, but perhaps we should refer to them as crypto assets because they are not actually currencies. I mean, except for example, for the case of El Salvador, which decided to declare Bitcoin as legal tender on September 7, a couple of months ago. Generally speaking, cryptocurrencies are mostly used as a commodity, as an investment asset class. A very interesting one, yet volatile one. So that's why it is true that there might be some overlaps in certain areas, but generally speaking, a CBDC is used as legal tender, as a digital replacement of the physical money that we already have, while cryptocurrencies are more like an investment asset class rather than just a means to make and receive payments. So that's pretty much the idea. No? I hope I made myself clear because I know sometimes there might be some overlaps, and actually there are, because for example, there is one kind of cryptocurrencies, stable coins, which actually can overlap quite a lot with CBDCs. So whenever I said before that cryptos are not the same as CBDCs and they're like completely different, I was referring to cryptos in general. But we need to bear in mind that when it comes to the area of stable coins, there is a clear overlap with CBDCs, even though, of course, once again, they are not the same because stable coins are not issued by central banks. But in that case, I understand that there can be more elements of confusion. So even though I said right now that CBDCs are not cryptocurrencies, we need to bear in mind that, technically speaking, the world of CBDCs adopts many features from, or at least several, from the world of cryptocurrencies. For example, if we look at the digital yuan, the use of online and hardware wallets, and also the use of a two-key system architecture to secure transactions. Both technical features are features from the crypto world that have been adopted by, in this case, the Central Bank of China, the People's Bank of China, but I mean, it's actually going to be adopted by many other central banks. So in other words, even though CBDCs are not cryptos, technically speaking, central banks are learning a lot and are adopting many elements from the crypto world. And that's very important to bear in mind. One more idea before moving to the specific projects is that related to CBDCs and blockchain. As you all know, blockchain technology can be applied nowadays to many more areas than just cryptocurrencies, but it is undeniable that blockchain was invented to support, to underpin the operations of cryptocurrencies, more specifically of Bitcoin initially, and then of the rest of cryptocurrencies. So the thing is, do CBDCs need blockchain technology to work, to function properly? Well, the thing is, CBDCs do not need necessarily blockchain, but it has been proven that it might be useful and very beneficial for them to use this technology. For example, there was this project, which I'm going to explain later, called Project ABA in the United Arab Emirates in Saudi Arabia, where it was concluded that using DLT technologies to issue a wholesale CBDC between both central banks would be actually very beneficial. So, if you look, for example, at China, at the digital yuan case, which I mentioned before briefly, you will see that digital yuan is going to operate through a two-tier structure. So you need to look at it like in a pyramid, where on top, the People's Bank of China, China's central bank, is going to issue the digital yuan to the commercial banks. That's level one, without using blockchain. But then on a second level, those commercial banks are going to issue the digital yuan to the public at large through the use of blockchain. However, as you know, when I say blockchain, I don't mean that everything is on any public blockchain. As you know, blockchain networks can be public and be private. I mean, there are many like technical designs, possible technical designs behind them. No, so I'm just talking about the use or not of blockchain. What kind of blockchain it's used? That's something that would require like a much further discussion, and unfortunately we don't have time for that today. So now I'm going to proceed by analyzing what's the current status of CBDCs all over the world. Without moving there, I need to say that one of the things that makes so exciting for me to speak in the Caribbean today is the fact that the Caribbean is actually one of the areas of the regions in the world at the forefront of CBDCs. Actually, the first world-issued CBDC was that of the Bahamas in September 2020, the Sand Dollar. And in March, for example, eCash was launched as well in the Caribbean. So as you can see, the Caribbean is a very active region when it comes to CBDCs. There might be many explanations to that. One is also the fact that especially when it comes to wholesale CBDCs, being the Caribbean nation so small compared to other nations, it is actually of a huge interest to them to create systems for them to make payments and settlements much more efficient. So that's why perhaps it's one of the areas in the world where CBDCs are being so deeply studied and even launched. It is true what I said now about the Caribbean, but now in my presentation I'm going to try to look at other projects, because I assume that all of you being in the Caribbean already like master, the idea of the Sand Dollar in the Bahamas, eCash. So I'm going to leave those behind for now, for today, and focus just on digital yuan, Project ABA, digital euro, which are projects that may not be perhaps so familiar to you being in the Caribbean. So broadly speaking, 80% of central banks, actually it's a bit more than 80%, are already working on CBDCs. When I say work on CBDCs, I mean that they may be doing something as advanced as China, so about to launch its own CBDC, or like perhaps, let's say, Japan, Korea, which are not as advanced as China, but they are nevertheless testing their own CBDCs. Or I may be referring to something as basic as doing some initial research. So this idea of working on includes many different possible stages of work, not just countries which are about to launch their own CBDC. Even though many countries in the world are working on this, Asia, leaving aside the Caribbean, seems to be the place in the world, the region, the continent, where CBDCs are attracting much more interest. Because it's not just China being so advanced with the digital yuan. It's also, for example, Cambodia, which launched its very interesting project, Bakong. It's also Japan and Korea testing their own CBDCs. It's Thailand as well participating in the MCBC Bridge project, among others. So as you can see, many countries in Asia are active on this area. I don't mean by that all of them are going to eventually issue their CBDC, but at least they are active, they are working on that. So now, I'm going to talk about the world's most advanced CBDC project when it comes to a major economy. I mean, I said before that, of course, the Bahamas and Nigeria as well, Cambodia launched their own CBDCs already. But when it comes to like a major economy in the world, China is the most advanced one. They haven't launched yet their digital yuan. They're going to do so within the next 2 months. The idea is to launch it massively by the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing, which are going to take place, as I said, in less than 2 months. Digital yuan is very interesting because it's kind of encouraging other countries, especially in Europe and the West, to go a bit faster with its CBDC testing. I'm not saying by that China invented CBDCs or anything like that. No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that quite likely, if China hadn't been so advanced, we wouldn't have seen, let's say, Japan, Korea, the US, trying to test their own CBDCs or to work on them much faster than expected. No? So in that sense, China is kind of encouraging the others to go faster. It's not a fast process, though. China started to work on digital yuan in 2014, and they spent 6 years doing research on it until April 2020. So this whole process encompassed 6 years of research plus 2 years of testing, because as I said, that research started in April 2020, but it's going to last until this coming February. So almost 2 years of actual testing. As you can see on my slide as well, digital yuan is also known as DCEP, Digital Currency Electronic Payment. So whenever you hear or read on the media digital yuan, DCEP, eCNY, eRMB, those four concepts are actually making reference to the same idea of the digital yuan. They are all the same, just different ways to refer to it. As I said before, China started to test digital yuan in April 2020 in 4 cities: Shenzhen, Suzhou, Chengdu, and Xiong'an. And those tests were gradually widened to include more cities, more people, and higher amounts of money, to the point that right now it's being tested as well, for example, in Hong Kong for cross-border payments. It's being tested in many more Chinese cities and including many more people, because the idea is to test how it will work in practice. And so far, the testing has been very successful. That's why the idea of deploying it by the Winter Olympic Games is still there, and it seems it's going to become a reality, not just an idea. As I said before, DCP, or digital yuan, is going to be introduced by the People's Bank of China, which is China's central bank, which is consistent with the idea of it being a central bank issued digital currency. I also mentioned before that it's going to work through this two-tier structure, in which the People's Bank of China is going to issue the digital yuan to the commercial banks, and those commercial banks are going to issue the digital yuan to the public at large. This slide is actually very important because in CBDC theory, there are 2 different ways through which a central bank could launch or issue its CBDC. One would be issuing that CBDC directly to the public at large, skipping commercial banks. The second one would be the one followed by most countries, which is the one which uses intermediaries, the one in which central banks issue the CBDC to the commercial banks, and then those commercial banks issue the CBDC to the public. So they act as intermediaries, the commercial banks. Why is this second model more followed by more countries? Well, it's actually easy to see. I mean, there are like 2 main reasons. Firstly, it wouldn't make much sense for commercial banks to take the functions from commercial banks. Central banks have like a different role, like they're controlling monetary policy, issuing the currency. So that's why it wouldn't make much sense for them not just to keep doing their functions, but also to include the functions the commercial banks do. It would be like pointless for them, and it would be quite actually messy. Secondly, it wouldn't make much sense for CBDCs to issue the CBDC directly, for central banks to issue the CBDC directly to the public, because by doing so, central banks would, to some extent, be destroying the role of commercial banks and thus making them go out of business. And that wouldn't make much sense. I mean, it would be like not sustainable for any country to do so. So that's why most CBDC projects worldwide decide to follow this 2-tiered approach, through which commercial banks will remain acting as intermediaries in this whole launching process of the CBDC. As I said before, these CBDCs can be launched for many possible motivations. There are like many possible advantages behind them. In the case of China's digital yuan, to me, one of the main advantages or objectives, targets that the Chinese government and the Chinese central bank has is that of internationalizing the yuan. And that's not something that I'm just making up. If you look at China's moves these last few months, you will see that my statement seems consistent with China's movements. Because, for example, in February 2021, the People's Bank of China signed a joint venture with SWIFT, through which it was agreed that SWIFT would help China internationalize the yuan. Aside from that, China is testing digital yuan in Hong Kong for cross-border payments. Moreover, China signed last year in November the RCEP Free Trade Agreement, the Regional comprehensive economic partnership, which actually creates a free trade area which encompasses more than 30% of the world's global population and GDP. This free trade zone created by RCEP will actually be of potential use for China and any other Asian country to deploy their CBDCs for cross-border transactions in international trade. Or, lastly, aside from that, China as well has been promoting quite intensely its new Silk Road idea, the Belt and Road Initiative. This Belt and Road Initiative also will allow many countries, especially from Central Asia, to, if they want, start using digital yuan. One more possible benefit for that, for other countries to start using digital yuan, would be the fact that, as you know, the current global financial system is dominated by the US dollar. Therefore, whenever the US decides that a certain country needs to be sanctioned for whatever purposes, then this country is kind of excluded from international trade, as you know. But if digital yuan becomes a widely used tool in international trade, it's going to allow those countries to kind of bypass the US sanctions through the use of digital yuan. So as you can know, digital yuan might be a very powerful tool, not just for international trade, but also for global geopolitical reasons. So I hope I made myself clear in this point, because I know that this is actually a very interesting topic, the role of the yuan in international trade, about which I could speak for much longer, but I need to make this idea as brief as possible. One final remark about that is the fact that even though I said all these things right now, I don't mean by that the yuan, through digital yuan, is going to become the most widely used currency in international trade overnight. I mean, I didn't say that, because let's face it, the US dollar's role is actually still very strong and will quite likely remain so. So the thing is, to what extent will digital yuan be able to challenge the US dollar's dominance in international trade? That remains to be seen. I mean, China opened this door to digital yuan, so the door is open, but it doesn't mean that they're going to succeed quickly. It needs to be seen. It will take time, and we actually don't know what will happen for sure. So you can see in this slide as well some differences with existing payment apps. Well, I think that the main idea that you should take from here is the fact that a digital yuan is going to support offline payments, and it's going to be much faster than Diem, that project which used to be called Libra, led by Facebook, or Bitcoin, or of course cash, but cash is a different case. So right now I'm going to proceed by a few other projects in around 10 minutes. I'm going to go a bit faster with those projects, because to me they are relevant, of course, but they might not be as relevant as digital yuan, not because their countries are not relevant, of course, because Japan and Korea are as relevant as anyone, but because they are still in a very early stage compared to China's digital yuan. So focusing on Japan and its digital yen, well, this is going to be a retail CBDC project as well, same as China, for example, and same as most projects, but not all of them. And the whole idea is that, unlike China, the Bank of Japan is not sure whether they will in the end deploy their CBDC or not. What they know is that they want to test it now through this three-phase project. As you will see, there is proof of concept phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. But the Bank of Japan is not sure whether they will go ahead or not with this project. Unlike China, when they started the digital yuan, they knew that if everything went well, which it did in the end, they would be deploying it by the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing. So that was a clear intention to make it become a reality for sure. Whereas Japan, same as we will see with Korea, for example, wants to test it just to be prepared and to know whether it is feasible or not, from a monetary policy perspective, technically speaking, but they are not sure on whether they will deploy it or not. As I said before, this testing process will include those three POC phases, which I'm not going to dwell on them. And then you can see some principles stated by the Bank of Japan about the expected functions and roles of this general purpose CBDC or digital yen. Well, the idea is pretty much what I said before. No, I mean, the idea of the Bank of Japan is not to deploy it anytime soon or perhaps ever, but if the cash in circulation drops significantly in the future, then in that case they might consider issuing the digital yen. You need to bear in mind, though, that unlike China, where its citizens are very used to making digital payments through the use of the existing payment platform apps such as Alipay, WeChat Pay, people in Japan, even though there are, of course, similar platforms and they are very used to virtual banking as well, they are still much more reliant upon the use of physical cash, of physical coins and notes. So that's why perhaps issuing a CBDC in Japan might be a bit more complicated than in China for that idea of people being a bit more or a bit less used to making electronic payments, even though they are, of course. As you can see here, same idea as I said before, Japan's digital yen will follow as well this two-tiered structure in which the central bank is going to issue the CBDC to the intermediaries, and those intermediaries, commercial banks, quite likely, to the individuals or final users. So, one more project, Korea's digital won, and as you can see, I'm going very fast with those, but I just want you to get like one or two ideas from each one of them, and that's pretty much all I want you to get from my talk when it comes to these projects from Japan, Korea. Korea, well, pretty much same idea as Japan. The Bank of Korea, which is Korea's central bank, decided to carry forward or move forward with its project pretty much at the same time as Japan did. And they are also working on their pilot scheme on testing it. Basically, they analyzed through a report published by the Bank of Korea the legal requirements or implications of that. They conclude by saying that it would be possible from both a legal perspective, and then also the Bank of Korea analyzed the technical perspective to it, and it looks like, well, they clearly know how to do it. So it's about actually testing it and eventually in the future deciding whether they want to move forward with this or not. And when it comes to the latest news on this end, for example, on July, so less than 5 months ago, the Bank of Korea announced that they would be teaming up with GroundX, which is a subsidiary of Korea's internet company Kakao, which, as you know, is a huge company in Korea, which owns, for example, a very large virtual bank known as Kakao Bank, for its upcoming pilot. So as you can see, there are like many movements on this area, and the approach that Korea has decided to adopt is more similar to that of Japan rather than that of China. One more project now that I want to discuss, it's actually the penultimate one, is that one known as Project ABA, which involved the central banks of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. This one is interesting, and not just because I'm talking about a different region in the world, but mostly because, unlike the previous projects I mentioned before, this one makes reference to a wholesale CBDC project, not a retail one. You can see on this slide the timeline of this project. So basically, this project was started in January 2019, and it was concluded exactly 1 year ago on November 30, 2020, through the publication of its Project ABA report, which is available online in case you want to check it. It's a 100-page report, but very enlightening and very interesting for you to check if you want to dig deeper on this area of CBDCs, wholesale CBDCs, etc. The project included both central banks, the Central Bank of Saudi Arabia and the Central Bank of the United Arab Emirates, as well as 3 commercial banks from each country, Riyadh, Al Rajhi and Al Inma from Saudi Arabia, and Dubai Islamic, First Abu Dhabi and ENBD from the United Arab Emirates. Why were those commercial banks included? Well, to make this much more, to make the results of this report much more safe and conclusive, because if this project had included only both central banks, the results wouldn't have been that comprehensive. So that's why both countries decided to include three commercial banks from each one of them. The idea of this project, as I said before, was precisely to test whether, first of all, whether issuing a wholesale CBDC between both central banks would be feasible, and secondly, whether using DLT technologies, among which we can include blockchain, would be possible and beneficial. Well, the thing is, and I'm going to go to the conclusions directly because that's a part that is of most interest to me. It was concluded, first of all, that issuing a cross-border dual currency, so a wholesale CBDC between both central banks, was technically viable, and that it was possible to design a distributed payment system that offers the two countries significant improvement over centralized payment systems in terms of architectural resilience and efficiency. And secondly, when it comes to the use of DLT and blockchain, it was concluded that the performance objectives were not just met, but even exceeded, proving that DLT technologies could offer high levels of performance whilst, and this is very important, not compromising safety or privacy. So as you can see, this project was actually a success, confirming, not just the viability of issuing a wholesale CBDC, but also the viability of doing so through the use of DLT technologies. This project identified further areas to work on. So far, this hasn't become a reality yet, this project over, but I mean, the conclusions are there. So anytime we may be seeing both central banks deciding to make this become a reality. And last but not least, the digital euro. As you know, the European Central Bank is working towards a digital euro in the future. Actually, I am myself member of this think tank known as Digital Euro Association. So even though my main area of research is digital one, because of my involvement with Hong Kong and the rest of China, it is undeniable that digital euro will also be an interesting project and hopefully an interesting reality in the future. The European Central Bank launched last year in October a public consultation on digital euro, whose results were published in April, so half a year later. As per the results of this consultation, what the public and professionals want the most from a digital euro is privacy, followed by security, the ability to pay across the euro area, and also offline usability. So as you can see, privacy is a huge concern when it comes to CBDCs in the West, but actually worldwide. Well, I just wanted to make some mentions about privacy, quick ones here, because privacy is actually one of the hot topics when it comes to CBDCs and one of the most asked questions whenever I participate in any conference or workshop. The thing is, well, you need to bear in mind that the right technology exists to ensure privacy in CBDCs. There is actually a very interesting staff analytical note published by the Bank of Canada. I actually encourage you to read all those staff analytical notes by the Bank of Canada, which are very enlightening. But there is one specifically in which they deal with the topic of CBDCs and privacy. And in that staff analytical note, they conclude by saying that it is possible through the use of the right cryptographic techniques to ensure privacy in the CBDC area. So it is all about central banks being willing to do so and choosing the right technology to do so. So as long as they want to do so, they can do it. And we cannot confuse, though, privacy with anonymity. That's different. And we need to bear in mind as well that a balance needs to be met, because I said before on my first slide that the thing about CBDCs is that they are going as well to allow central banks to fight financial crime much more efficiently through allowing central banks to keep a much better track of the transactions, of the flow of capitals. That is true. So, as you can see, there is a balance that needs to be found between fighting financial crime much more efficiently and also making sure that privacy is respected, that people's privacy is ensured and respected. It is possible to find this balance because, as I said, the technology is there already, so it's not impossible at all. And well, as you can see, basically to conclude with the digital euro, the idea is that this process is being moved forward. I mean, in July, the European Central Bank decided to launch a digital euro project, which doesn't mean that in the end this will necessarily lead to issuing a digital euro, but at least they are getting ready for the possibility of doing so. And they expect to be able to launch a digital euro within a 2-3 year time span. But to be honest, I think that this might be perhaps a little bit too optimistic. I mean, if we look at China and other countries, issuing a CBDC may take longer. I mean, I would aim at 4 to 5 years at least, even though I may be wrong, of course, but I think it takes a bit more than 2 to 3. So, this investigation phase started in October and will last, as I said, about 2 years, theoretically. And last but not least, how will CBDCs impact our daily lives? Well, it's just a brief idea that I wanted to make. As I said, CBDCs are not cryptocurrencies, which means that each government may decide to approach this phenomenon differently. For example, in China, the Chinese government has adopted a tough stance towards cryptos, while promoting blockchain as a technology and promoting its own CBDC digital yuan. So that shows you that it is possible for a country to be tough towards cryptos whilst being blockchain friendly in general and CBDC friendly. Other countries, such as for example Singapore, are more crypto friendly and CBDC friendly as well. So as you can see, there are many approaches. Then there is like the opposite case, which is El Salvador, which decided to declare Bitcoin as legal tender, which, well, that's something quite unique, and we need to see how it goes in the end. So, I mean, regardless, it is possible to see many possible combinations in this area because, as I said before, they are not the same, and each one of them can serve different purposes. So each approach needs to be studied, analyzed, and respected, and try to learn from each other's experiences to make our own experience much more comprehensive and better in general. So, to conclude my talk, I just want to conclude by saying that we learned what CBDCs are and what they are not. We learned a bit about the main projects, and we saw that the Caribbean is at the forefront of it, same as Asia, especially East Asia. And I also analyzed a few interesting projects, especially digital yuan, but also digital yen in Japan, digital won in Korea, and digital euro in Europe, and Project ABA in Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. And that's pretty much all what I wanted to tell you today. I tried to make this as brief as possible. I know there is a lot to digest. So, as I said, for any one of you willing to learn more from me on this topic, you can always feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn, for example, and follow my updates. I'm always giving a corporate training on this area, publishing articles, participating in international conferences. So you can always engage me and reach out to me and read my articles. I will be more than willing to solve any doubts and stay in touch with all of you. So thank you very much for attending this talk, and thank you to the organizers once again for inviting me. Thank you.